The winter was bitter and silent across the forests of Luxembourg. Snow muffled every sound except the distant rumble of artillery and the shifting movements of armies locked in a final struggle. American forces, pushed hard by a sudden German offensive, dug in along the frozen ridges. They were outnumbered, short on visibility, and fighting in conditions where even survival felt like defiance. Yet hidden inside their ammunition dumps lay a new kind of weapon, something few soldiers had ever heard of, and even fewer understood. For years, artillery had been powerful, but imprecise. A shell that struck the ground before exploding wasted most of its force underground. A shell set to burst in the air had to be timed by hand, and even the slightest miscalculation sent it flashing uselessly through empty sky. The old fuses were clumsy tools in a war where speed and accuracy meant everything. Gunners fired thousands of rounds, hoping a few might count. Aircraft slipped through barrages untouched. Infantry survived barrages simply by hugging the earth. The new fuse promised to change all of that. Built through an extraordinary scientific effort, it contained a tiny radio system packed into the nose of a shell. Miniature tubes, a battery that sprang to life under the shock of firing, and delicate circuits hardened to withstand impossible forces. When a gun fired the shell, the radio inside immediately began transmitting a signal. Anything solid beneath or ahead of the shell reflected that signal back. As the shell approached the object, whether wings of a plane or troops sheltering below, the returning signal grew stronger. When it reached a certain strength, the fuse fired the detonator and the shell burst in midair, exactly where it could do the most damage. It was nearly impossible technology, something that should not have worked under the violence of a gun's recoil. Yet it did. And once it worked, it transformed everything. Shells now exploded at the perfect height, scattering fragments in a wide, lethal sphere. Aircraft that once slipped past defenses were suddenly torn apart by bursts that didn't need direct hits. On the ground, soldiers who thought they were protected by foxholes or shallow cover found themselves exposed to a rain of steel falling from above. The moment of truth came in the deep cold of the Ardennes, where American forces struggled to blunt the German advance. Snow fell softly over the town of Echternach as American artillery crews loaded their guns with the new fuses. At first, the German troops believed a routine barrage was beginning, just another storm of shells landing far off or thudding harmlessly into the earth. But then the explosions began bursting overhead. Instead of dull thumps in the ground, bright flashes ripped through the air. Metal shards shrieked downward in every direction, piercing cover, slicing through formations, and driving entire companies into chaos. Soldiers on the ground saw the effects instantly. German units trying to move across open fields were shredded before they reached shelter. Men crouched in foxholes were struck from above. Even those attempting to withdraw across the river found the air erupting around them. Survivors remembered the eerie whistle of shells arriving, the strange pause before detonation, and then the sudden tearing shock of fragments sweeping the landscape. The barrage broke the line so thoroughly that enemy troops fled back toward the town in confusion. American commanders were astonished by the results. Reports came back that hundreds of enemy soldiers had been killed in that single night's firing, a number nearly unimaginable for one attack. Veterans later described the shells as a grim kind of gift, something the enemy never expected and never fully understood until it was too late. By the time daylight returned, the defensive position was collapsing, and American infantry advanced to reclaim the ground. The success was not limited to that battlefield. Across seas and continents, the new fuse reshaped the way gunners fought. Ships at sea struck down incoming aircraft with a speed and certainty they never enjoyed before.
Defenders facing fast, unmanned weapons found themselves suddenly able to hit them with crushing efficiency. Infantry units used airburst fire to clear forests and entrenched positions that had once demanded costly assaults. The impact spread through every theater of the war. Scientists who had worked on the fuse later reflected on the project not simply as engineering, but as a race against time. They had built components that had to survive impossible forces, created mass production techniques for delicate electronics, and proven that it was possible to place a functioning radio inside a spinning, accelerating, violently shaking projectile. The accomplishment helped lay the foundations for modern electronics, printed circuits, miniature tubes, and ruggedized components that opened the door to later breakthroughs. Long after the war, armies continued to use the principles of the proximity fuse. Modern shells can still detonate above their targets, guided by sensors far more sophisticated but spiritually descended from that original invention. Missiles, smart munitions, and countless guided systems all follow the same basic idea: a weapon that senses that it is close enough to strike. The memory of that winter night endures. In the quiet darkness over the snowfields of Luxembourg, a single technological leap shifted the balance. A device scarcely larger than a fist broke open a battlefield, shattered an advance, and altered the course of a desperate fight. Its legacy lives on in every weapon that carries within it the power to decide, by itself, the moment to unleash its force.